Hello, welcome to the Voice of Rejoicing again this time. I'm so glad you're with me. All right, last week I was talking about Caiaphas's report that he had to file, and now this week we're going to talk about Pilate's report that he had to file. And this concerns the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and we hear this directly from Pontius Pilate's lips. He says Jesus was dragged before the high priest, and we know the high priest was Caiaphas, and condemned to death. It was then that the high priest Caiaphas performed an act of submission. In other words, he was being technically correct here. He sent his prisoner to me to confirm his condemnation and secure his execution. Okay, now these are the words of Herod. I answered him that as Jesus was a Galilean, the affair came under Herod's jurisdiction and ordered him to be sent that way. The wily tetrarch professed humility and, protesting his deference to the lieutenant of Caesar, he committed the fate of the man into my hands. Soon my palace assumed the aspect of a besieged citadel. Every moment increased the number of people who were malcontents. Jerusalem was inundated with crowds from the mountains of Nazareth. All Judea appeared to be pouring into the city. All right, now when I was in Israel on several trips, they have found documentation of Pontius Pilate having a stone. You have to be able to read Latin, but anyway, there's a stone that has his name etched in it, and this was found not too terribly long ago. So if anybody thinks that Pontius Pilate wasn't a real person, he was a real person. All right. He said, I had taken a wife from among the Gauls, that's the French, what we call French today, who pretended to see into futurity. In other words, she had some kind of connection where she could see something that was getting ready to happen. She wept and threw herself at my feet, and she said to me, Beware, beware, touch not that man, for he is holy. Last night I saw him in a vision. So apparently she, seeing into futurity, saw by way of visions. All right, she saw Jesus walking on the waters. He was flying on the wings of the wind. He spoke to the tempest and to the fishes of the lake. All were obedient to him. Behold, the torrent in Mount Kidron flows with blood. The statues of Caesar are filled with gemonicide. The columns of the interim have given away, and the sun is veiled in mourning like a vestal in the tomb. Ah, she said, Pilate, evil awaits thee if thou wilt not listen to the vows of thy wife. Dread the curse of a Roman Senate. Dread the frowns of Caesar. By this time, the marble staircase groaned under the weight of the multitude that were surrounding Pontius Pilate at this time. The Nazarene was brought back to me. I proceeded to the halls of justice, followed by my guard, and asked the people in a severe tone what they demanded. I suppose he thought by talking to them in a severe tone that he might get his way. He did not want to crucify Jesus. They said, the death of the Nazarene. For what crime? I asked. He has blasphemed. He has prophesied the ruin of the temple. He calls himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. And I said to them, Roman justice does not punish such offenses with death. And then I heard the crowd saying, Crucify him. Crucified him, cried the relentless rabble. The vociferations of the infuriated mob shook the palace to its foundations. He says, but there was only one who appeared to be calm in the midst of the vast multitude. It was the Nazarene. After many fruitless attempts to protect him from the fury of his merciless persecutors, I adopted a measure which at the moment appeared to me the only measure I could take that would save his life. I proposed, as it was their custom, to deliver another prisoner on such occasions, to release Jesus and let him go free. But they said Jesus was the one they wanted crucified. I then spoke to them of the inconsistency of their course as being incompatible with their laws, showing that no criminal judge could pass sentence on a criminal unless he had fasted one whole day, and that the sentence must have the consent of the Sanhedrin and the signature of the president of that court. No criminal could be executed on the same day that his sentence was fixed, and the next day, on the day of his execution, the Sanhedrin was required to review the whole proceeding. Also, according to their law, a man was stationed at the door of the court with a flag, and another a short way off on horseback, to cry the name of the criminal and his crime, and the names of his witnesses, and to know if anyone could testify in his favor. And the prisoner, on his way to execution, had the right to turn back 3 times and to plead if there was some new thing in his favor. I urged all these pleas, hoping that they might awe them into subjection, but they still cried, "Crucify him, crucify him." I then ordered Jesus to be scourged, hoping this might satisfy them, but it only increased their fury. I then called for a basin, all this is very biblical, isn't it? And washed my hands in the presence of the clamorous multitude, thus testifying that in my judgment Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing deserving of death, which also is exactly what the Bible says, but it was all in vain. It was his life these wretches thirsted for. Often in our civil commotions I have witnessed the furious anger of the multitude, but nothing could be compared to what I witnessed on this occasion. It might have been truly said that all the phantoms, in other words, the spirits of the infernal regions, had assembled at Jerusalem. The crowd appeared not to walk, but to be borne off and whirled around as a vortex, rolling along in living waves from the portals of the Praetorium even unto Mount Zion, with howling screams, shrieks, and vociferations such as were never heard in the tumults of the Forum. By degrees, the day darkened like a winter's twilight, such as had been at the death of the great Julius Caesar. It was likewise the Ides of March. I, the continued governor of a rebellious province, was leaning against a column of my basilic, contemplating athwart the dreary gloom these fiends of Tartarus who were dragging to execution the innocent Nazarene. All around me was deserted. Jerusalem had vomited forth her indwellers through the funeral gate that leads to Germanica. An air of sadness and desolation enveloped me. My guards had joined the cavalry, and the centurion, with a display of power, was endeavoring to keep order. I was left alone, and my breaking heart admonished me that what was passing at that moment appertained rather to the history of the gods than that of men. A loud clamor was heard proceeding from Golgotha, which, borne upon the winds, seemed to announce an agony such as was never heard by mortal ears. Dark clouds lowered over the pinnacle of the temple, and setting over the city, covered it as with a veil. So dreadful were the signs that men saw, both in the heavens and on the earth, that Dionysius the Areopagite is reported to have exclaimed, "Either the author of nature is suffering, or the universe is falling apart." Whilst these appalling scenes of nature were transpiring, there was a dreadful earthquake, which filled everybody with fear and scared the superstitious Jews, I'm just reading his words now, almost to death. It is said that Balthasar, an aged and learned Jew of Antioch, was found dead after the excitement was over. Whether he died from alarm or grief is not known. He was a strong friend of the Nazarene. Near the first hour of the night, I threw my mantle around me and went down into the city toward the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice was consummated. In other words, Jesus had died. The crowd was returning home, still agitated, it is true, but gloomy, taciturn, and desperate. That's one of the things that the devil is known for. He's known for stirring up a crowd, and when he's finished stirring up the crowd, they just don't know where to turn, even though they're still agitated. What they had witnessed had stricken them with terror and remorse. I also saw my little Roman cohort pass by mournfully. He had veiled his eagle in token of grief, and I overheard some of the Jewish soldiers murmuring strange words which I did not understand. Others were recounting miracles very like those which have so often smitten the Romans by the will of the gods. Sometimes groups of men and women would halt, then looking back toward Mount Calvary would remain motionless in expectation of witnessing something new. I returned, now this is Pontius Pilate. I returned to the praetorium, sad and pensive. On ascending the stairs, the steps of which were still stained with the blood of the Nazarene, I perceived an old man in a prayerful posture, and behind him several Romans in tears. This man threw himself at my feet, and he wept bitterly. He said, "It is painful to see an old man weep, and my heart being already overcharged with grief, we, those strangers, wept together." And in truth it seemed that the tears lay very shallow that day with many whom I perceived in the vast concourse of people. I never witnessed such an extreme revulsion of feeling. Those who betrayed and sold him, those who testified against him, those who cried, "Crucify him, we have his blood on our hands," all slunk off like cowardly curs and washed their teeth with vinegar. As I am told that Jesus taught a resurrection and a separation after death, if such should be the fact, I am sure it commenced in this vast crowd. So Pontius Pilate is talking now to the man that was the old man weeping in his arms. He said to him, "Father, after gaining control of my feelings. Who are you, and what is your request? Now listen to this. My name is Joseph of Arimathea, replied he, and I am come to beg of you upon my knees the permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth. And that's exactly what the Bible says, isn't it? Your prayer is granted, I said to him, and at the same time I ordered Manlius to take some soldiers with him to superintend the interment, lest it should be profaned. Okay. Now, a few days after the sepulchre was found empty, his disciples proclaimed all over the country that Jesus had risen from the dead as he had said he would do. This created even more excitement than the crucifixion. As to its truth, I cannot say for certain, but I have made some investigation of the matter, so you can examine for yourself and see if I am at fault here, as Herod represents. See, now they were starting to blame each other. It was going between Pontius Pilate and Herod, back and forth, because somebody they knew that there was going to be somebody that had to take the blame for this. All right, Joseph of Arimathea buried Jesus in his own tomb. Whether he contemplated his resurrection or calculated to cut him another one, I cannot tell. I think Joseph at this point realized that Jesus was going to come back to life. The day after he was buried, one of the priests came to the praetorium and said that they were apprehensive that his disciples would steal the body of Jesus and hide it and make it disappear as if he had risen from the dead, as he had foretold. They didn't believe, apparently, that when Jesus said, I will rise again, that I guess they didn't think he needed any help, and of which they were perfectly convinced. I sent him to the captain of the royal guard, and his name was Malchus. That's in the Bible, the one whose ear was cut off by Peter, to tell him to take the Jewish soldiers, place as many around the sepulchre as were needed. Then, if anything should happen, they would have only themselves to blame and not the Romans. When the great excitement arose about the sepulchre being found empty, I felt a deeper solicitude than ever. I sent for Malchus, who told me he had placed his Jewish lieutenant, Ben Isham, with 100 soldiers around the sepulchre. He told me that Isham and the soldiers were very much alarmed at what had occurred there that morning. I sent for this man Isham, who related to me, as near as I can recollect, the following circumstances. He said that at about the beginning of the 4th watch, they saw a soft and beautiful light over the sepulchre. At first he thought that the women had come to embalm the body of Jesus, as was their custom, but he could not see how they had gotten through the guards. While these thoughts were passing through his mind, behold, the whole place was lighted up, and there seemed to be crowds of the dead in their grave clothes. All seemed to be shouting and filled with ecstasy, while all around and above was the most beautiful music he had ever heard, and the whole air seemed to be full of voices praising God. At this time there seemed to be a swimming of the earth, a reeling and a swimming of the earth, so that he turned sick and faint, and he couldn't stand on his feet any longer. He said the earth seemed to swim out from under him, his senses left him, and so that he knew not what occurred next. I asked him in what condition he was when he came to. He said when he came to, he was lying on the ground with his face down. I asked him if he could not have been mistaken as to the light. Was it not day that was dawning in the east? He said at first he thought of that, but at a stone's cast it was exceedingly dark. And then he remembered it was too early for daytime. I asked him if his dizziness might not have come from being waked up and too suddenly and getting up too suddenly, as that sometimes had that effect. He said no, he was not, and had not been asleep all night. The penalty for sleeping at night was death, for him to sleep on duty. He said that he had allowed some of the soldiers to sleep. He just said to them, I'll watch you go, you go to sleep, because some of them were very tired. And some of them were asleep at that time. I asked him about how long the scene must have lasted. He said he didn't know, but he thought perhaps an hour. All right. I asked him if he went to the sepulchre after he had come to. He said no, because he was afraid. That just as soon as relief came, they all went to their quarters. I asked him if he had been questioned by the priests. He said yes, he had. They wanted him to say that it was, let me turn the page here, if I can separate it, that it was an earthquake, and there was an earthquake during the time that Jesus was on the cross. And he wanted him to say that there was an earthquake and that they were asleep. And they offered him money to say that the disciples came and stole Jesus, but he didn't see any disciples. He did not know that the body was gone until he was told that it was gone. I asked him what was the private opinion of those priests he had talked with. He said that some of them thought that Jesus was no man per se, that he was not a human being. In other words, they were noticing that, of course, we know that he was a fully man and fully God, but they were beginning to realize how fully God he was at this time. That he was not the son of Mary, they were thinking he was the son of God. That he was not the same that was said to be born of the Virgin in Bethlehem. That the same person had been on a lot, I can't go into all that, but there were epiphanies of Jesus in the Old Testament way before he came. That the same person had been on the earth before with Abraham and Lot, and at many times and many places. It seems to me that if the Jewish theory be correct, that these conclusions are correct, for they are in accord with this man's life, as it is known and testified by both friends and foes, for the elements were no more in his hands than clay in the hands of a potter. He could convert water into wine. He could change death into life, disease into health. He could calm the seas, still the storms, call up fish with a silver coin in its mouth. All these are in the Bible. Now I say, if he could do all these things, which he did, and many more, as the Jews themselves all testify, and it was in doing these things that created this animosity against him, he was not charged with any criminal offense, nor was he charged with violating any law, nor of wrongdoing any individual in person. And all these facts are known to thousands, as well by his foes as by his friends. I am almost ready to say, as did Manulus at the cross, truly, this was the Son of God. So we know the name of the man who was at the cross and said, truly, this was the Son of God. His name was Manulus. Now, noble sovereign, this is as near the facts in the case as I can arrive at, and I have taken great pains to make the statement very full, so that you may judge of my conduct upon the whole, as I hear that Herod Antipater actually, has said many hard things about me in this manner. With the promise of faithfulness and good wishes to my noble sovereign, I am your most obedient servant, Pontius Pilate. All right, so that's part of Pontius Pilate's report. And I thought you would find that very, very interesting as well. It seems like I just kind of have a knack of God kind of bringing me face to face with books that He would like for me to read on this program. All right, now, how much time have we got left here? Let's see. Okay, we're about finished. Next week, what I will do is I will go over the extra appearances, and I have not used all of the appearances of Jesus here, but I've got several that I will talk about next week. He appeared to the apostles. Jesus appeared to the apostles on a mountain in Galilee. That's found in Matthew 16, and that's where He gave us His Great Commission. Jesus told them to go to all the nations and make disciples. He appeared to His brother James. We've got the book of James in the Bible, his half-brother, and that's in 1 Corinthians 15:7, that particular reference there. Also in Acts 1:3-8, Jesus appeared to the apostles and ate a meal with them. All right. He appeared on Paul after the fact. Now, Paul was not here when Jesus died on the cross, but he still appeared to Paul later on the road to Damascus, and that's in chapter 9. All right. My question is, you remember we talked about the two men in the Bible who were prophesied, Mark Twain and the man with the measuring line. We talked about that's in our time period. This was in the 1800s. So how can anyone not believe in Jesus? You have to wonder sometimes if maybe people just aren't ready, like Paul wasn't when Jesus appeared to him. Maybe some people are just not ready to believe in Jesus because maybe they think it might interfere with their life. They might have to turn their life over to Jesus and obey Him. There could be lots of different reasons, but after all the evidence that we have regarding Jesus, you do have to ask yourself the question, how can anyone not believe in Jesus, especially after He appeared to over 500 of His disciples? And that's found in 1 Corinthians 15:6. So we'll talk about those next week, and I hope you'll plan to be with me on the Voice of Rejoicing.